When I say 2 is better than 1, I don't mean systems. Nowadays, single systems are so damn capable that even for streamers, a dual system is a nice to have, but not a necessity like it used to be, and riddled with more expense. No, what I'm talking about is much, much rarer. Dual case systems. So, what have I got to back this up? Well, you've got the Thermaltake Core P100, which is kind of a case, but it can't actually house a system on its own, so it doesn't really count. It's only useful as an expansion to the W100, which combined to make the WP100. But there are, or were, the Cooler Master half stackers, which are, or were, awesome, and like the P100, can be bolted onto a larger parent case. But unlike the P100, these can be an ITX case on their own, and can even be stacked on top of each other to make a dual system, or a really expanded single system. Heck, that would be a system that could take 2 ATX power supply units, 6 3.5-inch drives, and a massive 170mm CPU cooler, a ludicrous 2 360mm radiators, and a 360mm long graphics card, but only one graphics card. That's to say, all of that was leading up to the ultimate dual case system, at least in my opinion. I think the case that comes to mind most is the Thermaltake Core V21. Like the half stacker, you can stack this thing on top of itself, but unlike the half stacker, you're not limited to an ITX board, since the Core V21 is a micro ATX case. So we really need to get comparing multiple Core V21s to other cases that stack up to their combined hardware capacities for a single system, and see how large they are, how much they cost, and where they improve or lack compared to multiple Core V21s. So let's see how the Core V21 stacks up against my spreadsheet of 300 cases. But before we get into this, the Sickness on Discord pointed out that it would be interesting to review and compare multiple cheap cases against a single more expensive case, which got me thinking, what cases do I know of that can be doubled up to optionally expand your system? That's why I'm making this video. He's got his own channel, by the way, called Pixel Generator. There are English and German versions, since he's talented enough to speak both languages, and he's specializing in cost-effective and approachable modding and detailed hardware breakdowns. He's had some pretty intensive surgery at the dentist lately, so he's been out of it for a while, but please go over to his channel and support his endeavors, and with any luck he'll be back up and running soon. It's early days for him, so constructive criticism is key. Don't be a dick about it, just let him know what works for you and what falls a little short, and I'm confident he'll really appreciate the feedback. Anyway, that's the stand-in for an ad. Not actually an ad, he's just a genuinely good guy and deserves more support. So let's see how the Core V21, a stackable case from 2015, stacks up today when it's stacked up on itself. To find out how it compares to other cases, I needed to input all the core specs into my spreadsheet and create duplicates, being mindful not to multiply the board, CPU cooler support, and graphics card support, since with a single system we can't easily or affordably utilize more than one case's support in those areas. I did multiply the power supply unit support, since you could feasibly integrate more power supply units into a single system machine. Briefly and roughly, the way this spreadsheet works is it takes the value of any given spec and gives it a score based on the support of that spec from any other case in the spreadsheet. I have two sets of values running side by side for all specs, one that tracks the support divided by the volume and then ranked against the rest of the spreadsheet, and one that doesn't, so I can better understand the capabilities of any given specification. There's a lot more to it, but relatively speaking, that's how it all works for every spec, and it's all mashed together in an average at the end for a total score. Now, the only way I'm going to be able to get an apt comparison here is to compare to cases of a similar score outside of volume, because there are a lot of smaller cases that will match this larger cases or stacked cases score when normalized for volume, and that would detract from us getting comparable information. Right. Let's get on to some comparisons. I was going to start with the dual stack V21s and then move on to the triple stack V21s, but I was pretty shocked that regarding overall compatibilities, even two V21s can take a truckload of hardware, so we're going to be comparing both simultaneously. To be honest, the whole spiel about two cases being better than one at the start was before I validated that sentence with the spreadsheet, and I think you'll be as surprised as I was. Starting with the overall score, averaging all the specs together, that's motherboard, CPU cooler clearance, graphics card length and PCI Express slots, power supply unit support, combined 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drive support, fan support and radiator support, All being equal, both cases easily fall into the top 20 most compatible cases, bar none. Whew, the dual Core V21s are in 8th place, which is interesting since it's only just behind the dual system Enthoo Pro 2, but triple V21s are in 2nd place for overall compatibility, better than the Core W100, the View 91, and only just missing out by a fair chunk, to the Core W200, which is a dual ATX case system, or system case. But even that is limited in the spreadsheet with only one board and one CPU cooler, which will be updated in time. So if we factor volume into all these cases, where do the Core V21s sit? They do actually pretty well. The dual V21 is in 3rd place, and the triple is just below in 5th place, and it's below the dual case since it's not utilizing all its motherboard, CPU cooler, and PCI Express slots, which makes a difference in being a less efficient setup, but more efficient than most of the most compatible cases on my spreadsheet. Drilling down a little on that, by volume, the dual V21s are the 6th smallest, and the triples are the 8th largest, which, looking back over the overall compatibility slide at the start, that's incredible considering it was second to the 218-litre Core W200, a 60% larger case. This is where we separate ourselves between the cool kids club that's moving on and the board game brigade that is interested in more. I'll go over the cost comparison after, so stick around if you're intrigued about that. Now, let's drill down into where the multiple Core V21s did well and where they lacked. To make this easier, I'll only mention specific specs where they're relevant, otherwise I'll be spending a week of my spare time editing this thing together. And I've got a pretty cool ITX case to review, so I want to move on to that. Motherboard support wise, the Core V21s are clearly down here. It's predictable that massive cases that are highly compatible are highly unlikely to support anything less than a single ATX board, much like the micro ATX boards in the V21s, and we're only counting for one here. CPU cooler support is at 185mm, which is overkill, but even still, it's very low down on the list considering cases like the Tower 900 have 260mm of CPU cooler support. Not something that I'd be unhappy about, though 185mm is clearly fine. Graphics card support is very limited for both V21 options here, since we're dealing with a micro ATX case and we're only accounting for one set of PCI Express slots. So we're limited to 5 slots at 350mm of length clearance, which is still plenty for a couple of cards, just not as much as the others, say the Core W200 with 20 slots and 470mm of clearance, but that does account for 2 sets of 10 slots for two ATX boards, but we're trying to compare as if the V21s were a single system, so there has to be some compromises made. Anyway, power supply unit wise, since we could, emphasis on could there, use 2 or 3 ATX power supply units with up to 200mm of clearance each, the Core V21s sit at the top of the list. The 3-case variant very far ahead of the others. Is 3 power supplies for a single machine overkill? Yes, to the power of 3, but it is doable. Drive support is another area that the Core V21s excel in, and this one is even more controversial than the power supply unit support, at least I think. So, the standard Core V21 can take 3 3.5-inch and 3 2.5-inch drives simultaneously. So that stands to reason that support doubles and triples with the stacked variants. This places the triple stacked V21 in 3rd position. That's not controversial, but if you know much about micro ATX boards, like ATX boards, they typically don't support anything like up to 18 SATA devices simultaneously. You can get up to maybe about 8 in some situations with some boards. To achieve the 18 figure, you'll need to consider some sort of SATA or maybe even SAS PCI Express card, which would diminish your PCI Express slots on your already relatively lacking 5 PCI Express slot board. The other cases on the list typically support eATX boards, which can have far increased drive support by up to, well, default of up to 13 SATA ports, and more slots for add-in cards to expand that and not diminish other cards you might want, say graphics cards. That's enough drive talk, let's talk fan support. And unsurprisingly, since even 3 V21s aren't as big as a single core W200, they don't quite support as many fans. Rather than going into all the fan support, I'll take the maximum fan support area and give you an equivalent to the amount of 120mm fans that you could fit in the case, if it was very efficiently laid out and it supported only 120mm fans. So this gets a little mental. The dual V21s can take an equivalent fan area of 26 120mm fans. Likewise, the triple can take up to an equivalent of 39 120mm fans, and the W200 that tops even the triple can take a mind-melting equivalent of 48 120mm fans. That's the same as $1,100 worth of Noctua NF F12 Chromax 120mm fans. I'm pretty confident that I can say you don't need that many fans ever. And even if one of you does, I'm probably above 99% accurate in my level of accuracy to make that claim. So, how about radiators? Well, I don't think I need to go into all that again. They can take a lot of radiators. Here's the graph. You don't need that many, and the V21s can take a lot of things that you don't need. Probably. Looking at the included fan situation, and the V21s come with some pretty basic 200mm fans, which is pretty good. Not as good as the Abcon Core AL1000 sinks that come with 4 200mm fans, so factor in my fans scoring it into the final score, the V21s are doing fairly well, all things considered. Factoring cost into the score without the fan bonus, and the Enthoo Pro 2 is a really interesting option, followed closely by the Core V21 dual stacked case. But the Enthoo Pro 2 doesn't come with fans, so factoring in the fans and the Enthoo Pro 2 falls behind the dual Core V21 stacked case, and the Define R6 pushes into the lead with its 3 140mm included fans. The triple stacked Core V21s don't seem to shine as bright in all of these price versus score graphs though. So, last but not least, putting all of that into context, the raw price. And yeah, the Enthoo Pro 2 is affordable for what it provides at $140, which is incidentally the same price as the dual stacked Core V21s. And this is where I kind of need to confess my sins to all who are listening. I'd go with the Enthoo Pro 2. I know, the Enthoo Pro 2 sucks because you can't fit 2 micro ATX boards into it, which we all know is the best form factor for a board. It's the perfect in-between of a mini ITX and an ATX case. Who needs all those slots, really? But yeah, when we're talking about a case of this size, you probably want a larger eATX board of some sort, and there is the option for a smaller than micro ATX ITX board on the side. The triple case though, that's not a lot more expensive, and if you're looking at some of the qualities for the much larger W200 and think, that might be out of my price range, and do I need support for 2 ATX boards? Who's considering the W200 if they don't need that? Then maybe you might think, well, the answer is the triple stacked Core V21s. Potentially. So, are 2 or even 3 small cases better than 1? Well, yes, but on average probably not. There are edge cases where it could be helpful, and the Core V21s would be really helpful for people who need multiple, more complicated systems where a mini ITX add-on system wouldn't be able to support that demand. But if you need one seriously capable computer, then you're really limiting yourself with a micro ATX based system. There's very little regarding savings, if any, and there's a deficit in case quality. I mean, what would you regard as a higher quality case? The $140 Enthoo Pro 2 or the $270 Core V21s? I thought this was a really interesting thought experiment, but now I really want to get onto that ITX case review. I'm so excited for a case that's £30. It's unbelievable. Sorry for the less than ideal uploading at the moment. That goes for the style of videos and potentially the upload schedule, since work, like proper career work, is extremely busy right now and will be for at least the next month or maybe 2. even on the days that I haven't worked overtime, I'm a little mentally exhausted. So please help me out and support the channel however you can with likes, comments, suggestions, even subscribing, or maybe even sharing the video if you can. That really helps me long term, and I need all the help I can get. So thanks for checking this one out. Thank you to my patrons for their ongoing support, and I will catch you in the next one.